So this is The Custody of Angus McDonald by Blueshine, Chapter 11, Through the Door, in which Angus gets ready for the world's most dangerous sleepover. There is a content warning. The second half of this chapter gets a little more in-depth into some of what Angus's aunts did when he was younger. If you're at all squeamish about child neglect or alcohol, stop reading this chapter and go to the endnotes after the scene where Angus leaves and Magnus hugs Taako. You're technically not missing anything if you skip, you just miss details. An overview is talked about in the first half, which I left intentionally vague, so it's not too bad if you're skipping. So, yeah, I guess, like, if that is an issue for you, I would dip out after the scene where Angus leaves and Magnus hugs Taako, or, like, mute the chat, and you'll be able to see on the screen when we switch to next fic. Okay, also.
Angus MacDonald sat with his little briefcase, listening to Mr. McElroy explain the next part of his investigation to the candidates. Angus had already spoken to him extensively about it. Mr. McElroy was hesitant to do it at first because of the poisoning incident. Magnus was more hesitant, but Angus insisted. It would be good evidence. He could handle it. It was only a little dangerous. Angus clutched the record gem. Just prodding a little and they'd break. His eyes met the ceiling. Mr. McElroy spoke.
Angus will live with each candidate for a week. Once in the middle of the week and once at the end of the week, I will come over and evaluate Angus's treatment in your homes.
And at least one of them won't pass. Angus took a breath. Maybe two, if I can push her far enough.
First week goes to Lauren McDonald, the second to Violet McDonald, and the third to Taako.
It'll probably be fine. Angus only half listened to Mr. McElroy after that. He knew he was going to say, Angus helped write the rules for the live-in investigation. Even so, he felt afraid. An entire catalog of horrible things could happen while he was at Lauren's, not to mention all of the things that could happen once Angus decided to push a few buttons. He knew he could call Mr. McElroy up at any point of the week and get out of it, but he needed evidence. Lots of it. Okay, maybe he didn't need it. Maybe he needed to get enough to get his aunts out of the hair long term. Because, honestly, it wouldn't take too much to swing the whole thing in Taako's favor. That wouldn't be enough, though. Angus was tired of waiting for somebody else to figure it out. After living on the moon, Angus got an idea of how adults should act before taking care of children. It didn't match up with what his aunts did, and now Angus was angry. He was the world's greatest detective, and he was bound to determine and unmask these aunts. They do enough for him. Time for a little payback. He deserved that, right? Angus knew it was dangerous, but he wasn't in the mood to play victim in this. This was just a normal detective job. He just had a bigger lead than usual. Time for Angus MacDonald to wreck shop. Nope. Taako hated this. A week with Violet, all things considered, wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. She wanted control and order, and having Angus over her roof would allow her both. Taako had lived with an uncle like that for a year and a half, wanted things just so. They wouldn't account for the fact that children have a little something called free will and opinions. They don't factor in their aspirations. You don't want to go to law school? You go to law school. They have a plan, and if it's not followed to the letter, they'll lash out. It's a shitty place to live. But for a week, doable. As long as you can play their games in their house, they won't hurt you. Might get some fancy food out of it. She'd also be on her best behavior. Probably wouldn't pull another stunt like before. It would be claustrophobic situation. Angus wouldn't get free time, and Taako would have to do damage control once he had the boy under his roof. But Angus would be safe. A week with Lauren wouldn't be safe. He heard the stories from Angus. He was married to his uncle, divorced, and when his uncle dropped off the map, she figured she could just keep him. Didn't know how to take care of a kid. Assumed that Angus was like an adult and could take care of himself. Got a lot of extra income from her shitty house with all of Angus' boy wonder detective money. And that's a horrible reason to keep a child in the house, for money. It made sense that Angus would take a job at the B.O.B. so hastily. Anything to get out of Lauren's house. It made Taako's blood boil. The Trace Horny boys teased the daylight out of this kid. He still loved them. Still smiled when they walked into the room. Stayed up all night on candlelights to make sure they were safe from the crystals. Maybe some of the goofs went too far. Taako hadn't really thought about it. It didn't matter to him. Except now, knowing where the kids came from, Angus' interaction with the Trace Horny boys may have been the first positive experience he had with adults, even if it was shitty in retrospect. But better than the aunts. Hold on. What was with the looks? Mr. McElroy and Magnus were staring at him. Oh shit. Did they ask him a question? Spacing out in the middle of the meeting was not great. And was he shaking? Hopefully it wasn't too visible. He looked to Angus, eyes forward, neutral expression, even breathing. Not the face of a kid who about to go live with actual human garbage for a week. It was probably a defense mechanism, and a severely practiced one at that. Maybe it came with his detective work, right? Angus was so calm while he was solving the Rockport murder. A more even temperament than a normal kid's his age. Pretending everything was fine should have gone easy for him. Taako knew how to do that. Shit, he was following the kid's lead. Just pretend everything was fine. Lep used that a lot, too. Taako felt like vomiting again.
Are you okay with that, Taako?
Mr. McElroy asked, and by the look on his face, it seemed like he was repeating himself. Taako looked at Magnus. Come on, big guy. What was he talking about? He needed a clue. Magnus nodded quickly, so whatever Taako was agreeing to was good. Yet,
Yeah, that's fine. No problem.
Mr. McElroy paused, suspicious, but asked to meet Lauren and Angus alone. He said goodbye to Magnus, Taako, and Violet and left with the other two. Violet grimaced at Taako briefly before walking away. Magnus waited until Violet was out of sight before crushing Taako in with a hug.
Ouch, fuck, Magnus, cut that out! You're worried about Angus!
Magnus didn't let go, and Taako kept his arms limp. He rolled his eyes, overdramatic.
Yeah, I've got a right to be. I know.
Magnus looked to the floor. Taako sighed, knowing Magnus wasn't going to let go. He laid his arms around his shoulders, reciprocating the hug. It looked funny to any witnesses because Magnus was just too big for someone like Taako to get his arms all the way around.
Fuck, I wish I could be there for him right now. That's... That's sweet, Taako. Yeah, fucking whatever.
His eyes were fixed in the direction Angus left.
Is he going to be okay at Lauren's? No.
Taako groaned. He mashed his face into Magnus' shoulder.
I mean, he won't die.
Magnus made a small noise.
I don't like that. Yeah, no shit.
Taako said, pulling back from the grip hold.
He's smart. He'll call the fucking social worker if shit breaks bad. I kinda wanna beat the shit out of both of them. Don't we all? And no magic either? Taako wants to do a punch on them. Like that would do anything. Ow!
Magnus was interrupted by a swift punch to the arm. It didn't hurt that much, but it surprised him. Magnus and Taako parted ways. Both of them had 2 weeks of free time now. The thought of a bad taste in Taako's mouth. Angus McDonald, 7 years old, dropped his briefcase at the floor. His uncle insisted they move in with his new squeeze. Her name was Lauren, and Angus could tell within 2 meetings that she hated children. Lauren groaned when Angus tried to speak to her, but once his uncle was in the room, she suddenly started doting on him. Once she realized the boy was pretty self-sufficient, she didn't pay Angus much mind. At least, she didn't until she found out Angus had a new job. Then she was all about Angus. There was some mystery to be solved there, but the boy didn't have enough experience to crack it. Angus didn't really mind if Lauren didn't like him. That's fine. His grandpa once told him that not everyone was going to like him, and that wasn't his fault. She had been dating his uncle for 3 months, and they were engaged already. Angus didn't read a lot of books with kissing in them, but something in his mind screamed that this was too soon. They didn't kiss a lot, and Lauren didn't say she loved him, but nobody told Angus a lot about relationships. He wasn't sure what was normal. He didn't really care. Angus had been absorbed in his work lately. He didn't need to think too much about his home life. Lots of times, he was at the police station or out on the field. They were training him to be a detective after he had solved a murder on accident. Most serial killers and murderers don't expect a child to come up and start collecting evidence, so he was great at undercover work. But the longer Lauren stayed with his uncle, the longer he had time to notice things. Angus McDonald, 9 years old, dropped his briefcase at the floor. His uncle had gone missing. Lauren didn't seem concerned. She moved into another house, taking Angus with even though his other aunt was screaming to take him back. This house wasn't as good as the last one, but Lauren was living below her means and Angus could appreciate that. Building up a savings pool was fiscally responsible. Although she did spend a lot of money on alcohol, but only the money that she took as payment for taking care of him. Lauren had married his uncle when Angus was 8. He still hadn't read many kissing books, but when he did, the imagery of the characters on the page didn't line up with what Lauren and his uncle did. He wasn't sure which version of love to expect. Again, he wasn't super interested. The closest he had gone to was one boy that kissed his cheek and he solved a murder for him, and that was kind of nice. She still didn't like Angus at all. Now that his uncle was gone, she didn't have to pretend to like him so much. At least she didn't have to micromanage him like Aunt Violet used to do. Angus was still absorbed in his work. It was the only thing made him valuable to Lauren, so he did as best as he could. And the work was fun enough. Everything was a puzzle, just like his Caleb Cleveland novels. He was good at it, too. Criminals underestimated him. When they figured out Angus was actually a genius detective, it was too late. Angus MacDonald, 10 years old, was tired of this shit. Lauren's house, without question, was the shittiest place Angus had been in. If you were a normal person asked to come in, you might make the assumption that Lauren was disorganized. You might think, oh, she must be busy at work or something. It's a little messy in here, but that's okay. The dirty dishes laying around the living room were fine for a young university student, but it was pathetic in an adult's home. But no, not disorganized. She just didn't care about anything. He had a theory that she murdered his uncle. No evidence yet. He'd find it. Angus was too familiar with alcohol for a kid his age. Don't worry, he didn't drink it, but he watched his aunt drink it. He had to hold her hair back a few times. Lauren forgot to make dinner half the time. Fine, because Angus got food at work. Not fine, because she'd eat his leftovers when he brought it back. This resulted in Angus shoveling food in at work and eating stale crackers at night. It was fine, because Angus had an out. He was going to his grandfather. If only for a few weeks he'd be out of the house. And then got to go alone. No aunts on the train with him. He might see Violet when he got there, but had a day's travel by himself. No adults. Adults have been so dumb lately. If he was an adult, he would have noticed that exhibiting warning signs all over the place. But none of the adults asked him if he was alright or if everything was okay at home because Angry got very good at playing his character. Angus McDonald, boy detective, the police's darling child, a kid that hid a crossbow in his sleeve and a magical interception book in his arm. And most, if it wasn't an act, because he was a very good detective and despite his situation, a happy boy. He couldn't let himself get coarse because of his shitty aunt. Maybe if he was lucky, something good would happen on this train. Angus MacDonald, 11 years old, dropped his briefcase at the door. He thought he was done with Lauren. He thought he was done with her insistence on him working longer hours, how she insisted to send him off to school because it would impede on his work. He thought he was done hearing her drunk ramblings about missing his uncle, with it dragging over a bed in the middle of the night. He thought he was done being fought over, being caught in between so too pushy and too lazy. And he'd be done soon. Just a little pressing, a couple nights over, and he'd be done with Lauren. Again, she was the easiest person to take down. All she needed was to come home blackout drunk once, or miss dinner, or hell, there were 100 ways she could mess this up, and Angus knew she'd run into at least 10 before the week was over, or even half over. This was the first time he walked through this door and felt good about it. It was time to take down a criminal.
Nice.
That was good.
Yeah.
Love Angus. I do really like this fic. I'm glad that it suggested it.
That's pretty good.